My name's Dr. Suzie Thomas. I'm a senior lecturer in museum studies at University of Helsinki in Finland, and I'm also a member of the research team of a project called Lapland's Dark Heritage, which is funded by the Academy of Finland and looks at the legacy of World War II material culture in northern Lapland, in Finnish Lapland. So we're very interested in this whole concept of dark heritage, which is quite a popular term in the last couple of years within heritage studies more generally. There's different ideas of types of heritage, so there's archaeological heritage, architectural heritage, natural heritage, and so on. And so it's different ways of thinking about what we mean by heritage at all. With dark heritage, it's a term that deals with maybe more challenging aspects of the past that people may or may not be comfortable with. There's similar terms as well. There's contested heritage, which is often used for aspects of history and of the past, which people have different values attached to. So for one group or community, a certain aspect of history might be a very positive and happy thing, but for another group it's a terrible thing, and so it's a contested type of heritage. And dark heritage really sort of builds on all of those terms and looks at aspects of the past which people still choose to engage with, which may be challenging or upsetting for different reasons. They might be heritages that deal with atrocities. So, for example, a concentration camp would be a very dark form of heritage, although it's still, people argue it should be preserved and it should be kept because it's an aspect of history which humankind shouldn't be not thinking about and forgetting about. Dark heritage also stems from this other concept which sort of came about. You could argue it's been around since the Victorian times at least, but really got sort of labelled and identified in the 1990s as dark tourism, and this is the idea of people purposefully visiting sites to do with atrocity or death or suffering as a touristic venture. So again, if you think about people visiting sites where earthquakes have happened because they want to see the damage, or people visiting sites connected to war and conflict. And so again, dark heritage grows on this concept of dark tourism. Tourism is an aspect of heritage. People visit heritage sites, but heritage is more than tourism. It's also how people feel about it emotionally. It could be that people have very personal family heritage connections to a place. It can do with sense of place in general, if it's somewhere where you live, where you've grown up, or maybe somewhere that you've moved to and you're trying to get to know your new environment by becoming familiarised with the heritage. So dark heritage, in a nutshell, basically, is it's a study of heritage connected to difficult or contested pasts, usually to do with times of conflict. And that's certainly the case with Lapland's dark heritage, where we're looking specifically at Second World War heritage, and especially in the context of Finland, the heritage connected to Nazi Germany and German presence within Finland as a co-belligerent, and the sort of difficult negotiation that Finland as a nation now has of dealing with the having sided with Nazi Germany during the war, and also the presence of such as prisoner of war camps and the different evidence that we have for the way that people were treated at those camps. So dark heritage essentially deals with how we in the present reconcile with this kind of history. So I'm sitting in a cell in one of the cell blocks of Camp 21 at Cultybraggan in Perttola, Scotland. Camp 21 was one of several prisoner of war camps in the United Kingdom which were put aside for what were known as the Black Nazis. These were the most hardcore, ardent followers of Nazi ideology who were captured. So this was a camp where if they'd been categorised as black, they'd be kept here. There were other prisoners here too, who had so-called grey Nazis all the way through to white, which were considered the prisoners sort of least subscribing to the ideology of Nazism. That just happened to be soldiers in the war. And Cultybraggan is an interesting site because unlike many of the camps from that period, a large proportion of it still remains, is still surviving. And at one time there were many camps like this across Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, but most of them are now gone. Cultybraggan is also interesting because it was bought by the local community under the Land Reform Act of Scotland, and so it belongs to the people of Comrie, the village which this is part of. We've been working here for the last couple of weeks with the Centre for Battlefield Archaeology at the University of Glasgow in a project directed by Dr. Iain. This has been a sort of mixed project in a way. We've been doing archaeological fieldwork to try and locate some of the tunnels that have been reported and some of the historical evidence to do with the camp. We've also had the excavations open to the wider community, so it's been a partial community archaeology project, and we've had local volunteers coming and assisting in the fieldwork, and also just coming to have a look at the camp while we've been working, and to have a look at the excavations and find out what we've been doing and what we've found. We also had an open day, so we had a lot of people coming around on guided tours and seeing the excavation as part of that. In addition to that, I've been doing other work sort of as a side project to complement the work that we're doing in Finnish Lapland, and because in Lapland we're very interested also in the way that people feel about the material remains in the present. We've been interviewing local Sami and local Finnish people about that. So here I've been interviewing people from the village of Comrie and the surrounding area that have different connections to the place. So this has ranged from people with actual family connections that maybe had a family member who was here as a prisoner, or later, when this was run by the Ministry of Defence, trained here as a soldier or as a cadet, through to people with a passion for local history that have become interested in this place, through to people who just happen to live in Comrie and may not have a particular interest in history at all, and just regard this as part of where they live. And so I've been interviewing an interesting spectrum of different people in terms of gender and age, but also in terms of the opinions that have been coming up. And it's very interesting. One of the things that we've been asking people also in Lapland, because of the project being called Lapland's Dark Heritage, is whether people do see it as a dark heritage. Are they uncomfortable with what this place is, what these places were? And certainly here there are some people who have expressed that they're a little bit uncomfortable with knowing that German prisoners, and especially SS and Kriegsmarine and these sort of very seemingly hardline Nazis were kept here. Some people are uncomfortable with that, so in that respect it is a dark heritage. But at the same time, and this is very similar also to what we find in Finland, it's maybe not seen as a dark heritage by people, but simply as a local heritage. It's what happened in their neighbourhood, it's what happened to their families, it's part of their story. So there's a really interesting mix of points of view coming forward in this. I think Cultybraggan is a phenomenal site compared to the PoW camps that remain in Finland. The preservation here is outstanding. I came with a Finnish archaeology colleague a couple of years ago, and just watching his reaction, his astonishment was really, really interesting. And I think it's one of these places that people maybe don't understand just what an asset it is until it's too late. One of the things that struck me also in the interviews, on the one hand, have been these very sort of uplifting interviews of people who have a very emotional connection to the place, who truly, truly want to see it survive. But you do have the other end of the spectrum too. You have people who don't see the value, or maybe acknowledge that there's a heritage value, but would argue that there are stronger values, such as financial value. It's on land that could be used for other things. So I think, like all heritage sites, it faces an ongoing challenge to sort of demonstrate its value, not just to historians and archaeologists and people who kind of already know, they already care about places like this, but to people who maybe don't think they're interested in archaeology or history, or sort of even local history. I think there's a challenge to demonstrate to them that this is an important place. Something I say lots is that heritage sites aren't trees. You can't plant them and regrow them. If you pull them down, they're just gone. They're not going to grow back, as it were. In terms of the uniqueness of Cultybraggan, one thing that a couple of people have argued is it's not that unique. There were lots of places like this, but the point is there were, and there aren't anymore. So I think as an example of what it is, as a way also of acknowledging the POW experience, a lot of our wartime heritage, especially in this country, is centred around military history. So you get regimental museums. There's wonderful museums like the Imperial War Museum and the Imperial War Museum North in Salford, which do an incredibly good job at looking at the home front and looking at the experience of British military. But the experience of prisoners from other countries kept in Britain, I think, is less well acknowledged. There is Eden Camp, which is an excellent site. It's been very musealised in a way that each of the listen huts there is essentially an exhibition. And I think that's a really important way of using that site, but it's transformed from what it was. It's now a museum. It's no longer a POW camp in that sense. And obviously Cultybraggan's had transformations too. It's been a military training area. It's now a community-owned area. But I actually would support a campaign to see it recognised as World Heritage, because I think there's something universal about the experience of prisoners of war, and I think it's something that most people can, if they've not experienced themselves, they can relate to it, they can identify with it. You can imagine what it would be like to be far from home, to be captured, to be considered the enemy. Maybe in the case of people coming here who've been educated in a Nazi regime, to maybe start then questioning the ideology that you've grown up with and have that challenged. I think it's a very universal thing that people can relate to, and I think you need places that give you the space to do that. And the thing that's special about Cultybraggan, I mean, we're sitting in a cell right now, is that this is authentic. This isn't a mock-up, this isn't a studio set, this isn't a reconstruction, this is the real place.